What's going on, everybody? You guys know what time it is. Another recap of the day. Let's start off with just a snapshot on what happened today. Bond yield's pretty flat. Dollar is up about 0.7. Euro obviously down about the same. USD JPY up about 0.9. Bitcoin pretty flat, actually. Had a decent start of the day. It was up about 1%, and then he pulled back to break even. Gold down about 1% as well. So overall, not a whole lot of movement across the board. ES and NASDAQ did pretty well. ES up about 0.5%. NASDAQ, what are we on NASDAQ? We are up, let me see here, about 0.6%. So about 0.5% across the board, not too bad. Looking at the daily candle on ES, you did close pretty strong, closing above the prior day and almost closing above those prior highs from a couple weeks ago, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. But yeah, definitely a decent close on the daily on ES and closing pretty strong on NASDAQ. NASDAQ did close above those prior closes from the last week and the week before. So looking very strong on those macro timeframes. Let's take a look at our trade plan on ES and see how it played out today. So holding above 59.44 was our trade plan trigger, looking for 6,621. If you guys were watching the stream or if you were in the Discord, we did provide a couple of targets in between that 6,000. We were looking for, I think it was 60 and 70. Those targets were hit. And there was also a node. Where was that node? I think it was around 90-ish. Yeah, around 90. There was a node around 90 you could have targeted as well, which was almost the high of day. So a couple of smaller targets did get hit, but our larger trade plan at 6,000 was not hit. So we will keep an eye on that for tomorrow. NASDAQ, we had holding above 470. We were looking for 630 and 860. Did we get that 630? We did. We did not get the 860. So 860 will be a target moving forward. So definitely looking at the higher timeframes, looking at the macro, this is looking pretty solid after today. We had that very significant retest of that overlapping value, and then we had a significant break, which they basically did not allow any pullbacks during that break. So we were pushing out of that balance, that multi-day balance. They basically did not allow price to come back. But all right, let's take a look at some of the trades you could have taken today. So starting off from 9:30 to 10 o'clock, you basically didn't really have anything. You were just getting chopped out like crazy. Today was definitely one of those days where if you were a patient trader, you did pretty well. If you were an aggressive trader, you probably didn't do too well because you were getting chopped out for quite a while. So a lot of chop up until about 10 o'clock when we had that pullback into VWAP. You front ran VWAP by about a point or two, and it was at a very aggressive pullback. So you would have had to have your orders resting on VWAP in order to get that trade there. If you took it as a 30-minute sweep, that was another way you could have taken that instead of taking the VWAP trade, because let's be honest, a lot of people would have probably missed that VWAP trade. It was just way too fast. If you were watching the 30-minute and you were watching the 30-minute sweep, once it reclaimed 40, which was right around this low right here. Let me mark that out. So it was that low right there. So once it reclaimed that low, even if you waited for the 1 minute close, you would have got filled around like 43 to 45. If you took the sweep at the perfect level, it would have been around 40.5. Okay, so that was the trade that started the day, really. Anything before that, we were still waiting on the news to come out, just kind of chopping back and forth. The Delta wasn't really following each other from ES and NASDAQ. You didn't really have a clean trade. That was the start of the day with that clean trade at around 10:08. So like I said, you could have waited for the 1 minute close. That would have been a pretty solid entry. If you took the sweep at the perfect level, you were doing just fine. Stop loss below that 1 minute low, below that wick, or below VWAP. So after that started the trade, after that sweep started the trade, there's a couple of ways you could have exited this trade. You could have exited on the high of day, which was also lining up, I believe, at the time with the value high. So that rotation would have finished once you hit those highs around 50 to 52. So that would have been about a 10, I'd say about a 10, yeah, about a 10-point trade. If you got in late, maybe about 7 to 8 points. So looking for the prior highs, looking for that value high would have been a decent exit. If you were trailing this out and using the 24 EMA, you might have gotten faked out by that one candle close there. That's if you were trailing very tight. If you were trailing the 24, just waiting for sell pressure, you probably would not have been trailed out until around 11:50 or around 12 o'clock, where we had those pullbacks pretty deep below the 24. Once again, if you were waiting for confirmation on those, you probably would not have been trailed out. You really didn't have any confirmation below the 24 EMA. You were not putting in lower lows. You were just putting in a couple of 1-minute candle closes below that 24. So basically no confirmation below the 24 until way back here. So way back here, around 1:30 to around 2 o'clock, we started actually changing the market structure. So if I pull that up on NASDAQ, let's see here. That's around right here. So we can see a very clear market structure shift around 1:30 to 2 o'clock, which let me pull that up on the 30-minute here. That was around here. If you guys were in Discord, I called this out multiple times. I started talking about how the 30-minute candle was failing to break that high, which we were not failing the entire day. Look at these 30-minute candles. We were breaking the high on every single candle. So we had this is the start of the day right here. We had the 30-minute sweep on this candle right here. Broke the 30-minute high, 30-minute high, 30-minute high, 30-minute high. Same thing here, same thing here, same thing here. Okay. All the way till 1 o'clock, every 30-minute high was taken out. Every single one. Okay. The 1:30 candle did not break that 30-minute high. You actually put in a lower high. So once you establish that lower high, I talked about it in Discord, I posted it in the analysis channel, how that bearish delta started coming in very aggressively. Around like 1:50 p.m., we started seeing a massive cluster in bearish delta. That was around right here. So when you started to break those 1-minute lows, you started seeing a big spike in bearish delta. You did struggle to stay down there for a little bit, but then obviously you didn't struggle for very long. You tried to bounce a little bit around 150. You stayed below that 24 EMA and then just started nuking down to VWAP. So that was a trade in a couple of ways. You could have taken the trade when that first initial sell pressure started to come in, where you did not break that 30-minute high, and then you started to see significant seller delta around 87 to 88, kind of where that lower high starts to get established. You would treat that the same way you would treat a rollover top, because basically you were pushing up, then you started to shift market structure into lower highs. Okay, so the lower high shift happened here. You started to roll over. Look at the EMAs. The EMAs were trending up the entire time, trending up, trending up, trending up. And then look at the EMAs here. They start to roll over. So once those EMAs started to roll over, you started to lose those EMAs. Bearish delta started to come in pretty heavily. That was a clear market structure shift. All right. So you could have traded that as a rollover top, stop above the high. We target VWAP, or we target the prior lows that started the impulse. Now, the problem with that is this impulse started way long ago, way back in the 40s. So you would have had to target some smaller impulses. So you could have targeted like this low right here. That started an impulse. You could have targeted like these lows here. Those started little miniature impulses, whatever, right? A better target would have been the volume nodes. So like as we were climbing, we were putting in these very obvious volume nodes. So we had like a node there, we had a node there, we had a node there, etc., right? When you have a trending day like this, where you're trending very strong in one direction, what do we always talk about? We always talk about two things: building value and protecting that value. So as we were pushing up, we were constantly building these value nodes, and we were protecting those nodes on every single retrace. So like right here, we protected the prior nodes, pushed up. We built a node here, Look at this, pulled back, retested that node, protected it, pushed up, so on and so forth, right? We built a node here. Look at what it did, protected it, pushed up. Same thing here, built a node, protected it, pushed up. Then we no longer protected those nodes, okay? So on the way back down, you just target those nodes again, and we see if they are still protecting those nodes, which for a long way down, they were not protecting those nodes. The 80 EMA was pushing you down, the 24 EMA was trailing you, and once again, you saw another front run of VWAP. It was not a front run of VWAP on NASDAQ. NASDAQ had a pretty strong bounce once it actually tested VWAP. Unfortunately, that pullback was not deep enough to fill in the single print, so we did leave open a 67 single print and a 61 single print. And that was like right here, just a little bit lower, it would have filled that in. So you could have used the single prints as your targets as well. And unfortunately, you would not have gotten those two lower ones, but there were two single prints above that that did get filled in. Now, a couple of ways you could have gotten out of this trade. Very obviously, you could have used the 80 EMA as a trail. That got taken out around 218, very strong candle there. 24 EMA as a trail. That got taken out around 222 PM, I mean. So a couple of ways you could have exited. Market structure, VWAP, prior volume nodes, single prints, trailing the EMAs, whatever. There's many different ways, right? But that's how that trade kind of came to an end. And then once you started breaking that 24 around 223, that was kind of around here when you started to wick very aggressively. I talked about this in Discord again. You had a very strong wick close at around 228 to 230 when that 30-minute candle closed. Unfortunately, you didn't really get anything out of that. So if you would have traded that as a sweep, I would not advise that because I always talk about how when you're looking for these sweep trades, you want there to be a pretty decent wick to confirm that traders are being trapped, traders are being kind of squeezed out, right? You don't want that wick to be this long. That is a very significant wick. That is about, 12 points. So if you take that trade here, your stop loss is 12 points away there. So very far away. You typically want your stop loss to be like 5 to 7 points away if you're taking that sweep. So that would have been a pretty hard sweep to take. Let's say you did take the sweep. If you took that as a sweep trade around 81, your stop loss is like 12 points away, 12 to 15 points. Can you reasonably get 15 points out of this trade? Let's see here. That would be around 96. So you would have been looking for not only a high of day, you would have been looking for a pretty strong break of high of day. And that would have been around 230. So you would have needed a strong break of high of day within the next 3 30-minute candles, the next hour and a half, right? So if you thought you could have received that 15-point bounce after that 30-minute sweep, then you might have taken that trade. You probably would have been stopped out. Well, obviously, you would have been stopped out by the market closing. Your stop was never hit, but the market closed. So you would have taken a small loss on that trade, depending on where you entered. But yeah, after that candle closed, there wasn't really another trade. We were just kind of chopping around the POC, unless you took that sweep trade, which, like I talked about, not the greatest trade, because can you get a 15-point move before the close? Probably not going to happen. I think you reasonably could have targeted this cluster right here. So if you took this 30-minute sweep and you targeted like a 7-point bounce, that would have been reasonable. You probably could have retested those volume nodes. Now, obviously, in hindsight, we didn't really test them, so you would have missed out on that. But at the time, we didn't know that, right? So that's what I would have been targeting if I was taking a trade around this 2 o'clock. And then because you're targeting 7 points, your stop loss needs to be like 5 to 7 points away, which unfortunately, you would have been stopped out. Okay. Now, if you took that trade and it ended up not working, I don't think that's a terrible trade. So if you guys did take that and it didn't work, don't beat yourself up about it. I don't think it was that bad of a trade. But what you want to look for in the future is that is a very long wick. So that trade is already playing out by the time that 30-minute candle closes. So you would have wanted to be in that trade somewhere around these volume nodes, either the upper volume node at 77 or the lower volume node at 72. And at that point, you don't know that it's sweeping because it hasn't swept yet. So you are kind of predicting the sweep, which is dangerous. Like I said, once again, you typically want the wick to be around 5 to 7 points because that typically gives you a nice stop loss 5 to 7 points away. But you can still target 7 to 10 points on the upside, and you can probably get that on the upside. But if the wick is 15 points and you have to target a minimum of 15 points on the upside, good luck, right? But all right, guys, that was it for the recap. I appreciate you guys being here. As always, hit that like button, be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.